Hello. It's a bit wanky this, but I had to do a TEDx talk recently, and they sent me the video, and all I've noticed is that I tend to walk around like sort of a shit Michael McIntyre. Kind of stay roughly in one place, but that may make me slightly uncomfortable and find myself wandering around. So I apologise in advance, but I will try to stay roughly static. So yeah, the talk really is about two concepts that actually both are interrelated. One, internet dating is bullshit, and the other is internet is not for your cats. And the two things are actually the same thing, but it's not necessarily that obvious about why. So we'll start with a show of hands. Who here has used the internet recently? Okay, excellent. Good. Well done. You're doing very well. By a show of hands, what decade do you think the internet kind of started? We'll start with 1950. Hands up if you think the internet started in 1950. Okay. Hands up if you think it started in 1960. Hands up if you think it started in 1970. Hands up if you think it started in 1980. 1990. 2000. Okay. So those of you who said 1960, which is I think is about two of you, is absolutely right. Well done. Pat yourselves on the back. So well done. So what's really interesting about the internet and about why it started when it started is how many of you are Marxist critical theorists of any description? Yeah, I'm liking this guy here. He's kind of on my side. So in 1968, there was Soissons Outard. This was this great revolution in Paris, where the students, predominantly of one of the écoles there, they started digging up the cobbles and they started attacking the French gendarmerie, and they were trying to react against this kind of very oppressive media relation. They wanted to celebrate their freedom. They wanted to stand up for sort of, you know, these kind of very 60s ideals that these days feel very sort of separate from where we are. There's kind of these ideas about you know, sort of, especially very, very French ideas about fraternity and liberty and trying to kind of bring some of that a bit forward. So that, you know, we must remember the 60s was a very repressive time compared to now. I mean, you know, we didn't have gay marriage, we didn't have the same rights for black people, we didn't have the same right for immigrants. It was a very, very tough time. And at that time, there was a huge swell, this kind of huge emotion for sort of the poetical, the artistic, the philosophical. This is where we're seeing the beginnings of post-modernity, sort of emerging, really fascinating, sort of cultural significant times. But the system, of which I know far too well now, having done 12 months with them, is very slow to react. Government is the slowest thing in all society to react to change. And so there you have, in 1968, students in Paris, bright, talented poets, artists, musicians, novelists, digging up the streets and hurling cobbles at the police. And on the slightly sort of Nirvana punk side of me, I'm kind of like, amazing. And the other side of me is like, that's not okay. We find ourselves continuously caught in these sorts of scenarios. The year later, in 1969, the first ever interconnected message was sent between UCLA and Stanford. It's not a distance of much note these days, considering satellites in the sky, etc. But it's about 500 miles. It's the first time that two machines, and we're talking, you know, let's kind of really kind of understand this. I mean, we have this wonderful sort of what probably is actually in all reality a solid state amp, but in theory is pretending to be a valve amp. We're talking about physical spikes of electricity. We're talking about physical amplitude, volume ideas. We're talking about very analog waveforms being converted into ones and zeros as we completely understand them now. You know, this is not. It's not your MacBook Pro that is the best Facebook machine you've ever used that's really quick and YouTube loads fast. We're talking about gigantic devices the size of, you know, at that point, not much smaller than this room, using relay switches that are controlled by the spiking of electricity in order to direct information to add ones and zeros together to fundamentally create an output. And at this point, machines and computers at these times were not that far from being really clockwork devices in lots of ways. The electricity provided effectively the tick-tock of the metronome, right? That megahertz that you read about these days, that's what that is, right? It's just that, happening 1,000 times a second. And that's what electricity was doing back then. These kind of spiking, these kind of moving, it was switching relays from one place to another. And so what they built in Stanford was something called an IMP, that was an Interface Message Protocol System. And its only job was to be able to translate one message from one place to another. And all it did was send a spike of information down a wire, a physical wire, that ran along the ground, that they had to dig up the road to connect from one machine to another, so that someone could type in one message and see if it appeared at the other end of the display. The first ever message ever sent by the internet was hell. It was supposed to be hello. The zero was lost. And after much refactoring and switching around and looking at, working out why the wires didn't do what they were doing, they realized that there was some really fundamental issues. For example, it turns out that certain ampemeters and best way to explain this, certain spikage over certain lengths of wire, depending on your copper and nickel mix, will degrade, and no one knew this because no one had ever done it before. So over a certain limit of spiking, you'll get degradation, and if you don't have a clear spike and indication of what that volume is, then you can't really work it out, so you end up with losing volume. Anyway, getting back to the sort of non-geeky point, the second message ever sent across the internet was, "What hath God wrought?" And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful statement. Because a year after, when 1968 and the revolution, the power of Paris, the power of the world, the power of a sort of a love and peace generation. This is the time where Vietnam is waging. This is a time where communism, Marxism is still a valid concept. These ideas where the idea of a connected, global, shared world were really emerging on a philosophical and political concept. We emerge out into a technological new world. And it's now 2040. And my news feed is full of pictures of your fucking cat. My cat doing funny things with toast. My cat doing funny things with my baby. Double win, well done. Plus 200 points for having cat and baby in the same picture. Amazing. Or alternatively, it is a way for us to place a screen in between our personal interactions. It is a way for us to continuously find other ways of placing ourselves further and further away from each other. I can sit and happily spend hours over a pint, swiping left or right, making decisions about women that I have never met, that I have no view upon, apart from whether or not I decided I liked their profile picture. It could have been a bad light, it could have been a bad day, she could have had a skin reaction. She could have been trying to be humorous in a way that I didn't understand. But damn it, I am going to judge her on that and fool her that she doesn't have that right to get to know me anymore. And she is cast away into the bin. And every time I do this, I think to myself, have I just thrown away the love of my life? Right? Have I just literally swiped left? And that's it. I've ended what could have been the most beautiful and wonderful relationship of my entire life because I had to judge it in this very 1 and 0 demarcated capitalistic way that I had to say to myself, time is so short and I haven't even got time to read your profile picture. I've not even got time to know you. However, in my head, I believe that I have time to have a relationship with someone. And I have the time to give my heart over. I have the time to invest in you and you to me. However, I haven't got 5 seconds to actually research you, learn about you, find about your job, even have a question, or even ask you. Well, you might be okay on a good day. You might be annoying. I'm very similar. I am very similar. On a good day, I'm okay. On a bad day, I'm a dickhead. But luckily, unfortunately, it does feel like a very sort of patriarchal scenario where one is the chooser. And I find this really interesting. And I find it really interesting about how the internet has progressed, and about how we've kind of taken a technology that really was about trying to connect the world, and trying to connect people to people, and trying to create meaningful transactions of data in a way that was impossible previously, in a way that was trying to sort of understand how could we sort of de-hierarchize structure. How could we create a network that could never break? How could we create a system that was not one-to-many anymore, but a many-to-many system that could never, ever be broken? And that's what the philosophy of the internet is really about. It's about creating multiple routes to the same thing that can never be destroyed, that can never, ever be undone, that no government can ever turn off. Right? This is the 68 revolution. This is Soissons-Huttard writ large. This is a kind of a point of socialism. This is an entire idea about putting humans together with other humans to talk about the greater good of humanity. And as we begin to see Africa emerging with increasingly 60% and soon to be 70% 3G connection, whilst that may seem tedious and meaningless to us, and certainly not enough to even load your 2,000 Twitter followers, it is a huge step forward in terms of changing the world. It's a huge step forward in providing real-time information to people who previously had to rely on things like the world service that came from, unfortunately, a very colonial place. There is a huge opportunity now for lots of people to communicate in really meaningful ways. However, those of us who have it, and those of us who are empowered to use it in its best way, are quite happy just to look at GIFs of people falling over. We're quite happy to look at pretty pictures of cats. We're quite happy to look at, sort of ways to find, the majority of people seem to spend their life reading 25 ways to be more productive at work on a blog, instead of being productive at work, right? There are people who seem to spend their lives sitting on Facebook reading links about how to be productive at work. It's all very odd, right? It's all very kind of crazy. It's all very backwards. We have built possibly the greatest system in the world, and those of you who have ever taken mushrooms may understand there is a wonderful joy in understanding the idea of mycelium. Mycelium is this network of that all fungi operates on. It operates in every single part of soil that you can find. It's pretty much an analog to the network system that we have with the internet. Basically, it's these almost semi-invisible strands that connect everywhere. Wherever you see mushrooms, they are linked somewhere else to somewhere else. And big hippies, people like myself, who unfortunately exploited far too many drugs available to them via the internet, believe there is some parallel to these sorts of scenarios, which is by connecting everything, there can be moments that pop up that can create great joy and great pain. Don't take fly agaric, for example, that would definitely kill you. But there are other great properties that can be had. The world is infinitely linked in a myriad of ways, and it is linked in ways that are both physical and I hate to be a preacher, but also very deeply spiritual. We are all interconnected in lots of ways, far more than we ever realise. If we are to take what we have right now, which is a completely connected planet, and all we are going to do with that is to swipe left, swipe right, go on OkCupid, sit on Facebook, tweet meaningless pictures of your own food, and sell shit, we have failed. We have failed as a society. We have failed as humanity to not do the right thing. And the only point of this talk, really, apart from all the dressing up that just happened there, is really just to urge you very, very strongly to realise that you are living in a time of unprecedented connectivity. You're living in a time where more change can happen than you could ever possibly imagine. In the 60s, people had to physically dig up stones and aggress their oppressors. People recently are still pouring petrol on themselves and setting themselves on fire to prove their point about how angry they are about society. We don't have to do that anymore. We can mobilise people. And in a place like this, in a space like this, with talented people like you, whose expertise is mobilising people, it is sometimes important to take just a tiny moment to remember the internet is not for your cat, and it's not about getting you laid. It's about something far, far deeper and more important. And the longer that we keep running on an idea that it is about ourselves, our ego, our libido, our id, and our ideas of ourselves and our security about ourselves, the longer this society will become worse and worse and more depressing, and your political apathy will continue to run and run until we end up with nothingness, apart from self-driving cars that take us to Walmart via McDonald's, and we wonder what the hell happened to ourselves. And I urge you very strongly to just take a tiny moment, not only to respect those who didn't do as well as they should have done at the Olympics, but we didn't do as well as we could do, but we still have the power to change that. And that's all I want to say.